Welcome to Speech Scope, a MedBridge podcast where we conquer challenging topics for the medical SLP. Our aim is to deliver actionable takeaways for clinicians like you through captivating discussions with experts in our field. To receive continuing education credit for this episode and access bonus resources, make sure to check out medbridge.com. Hello, I'm your host, Sarah Baar, a clinical SLP in Michigan with over 15 years of experience. I specialize in adult neurogenic disorders and the life participation approach. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Penny Welch-West, an expert in the area of traumatic brain injury and the recently published INCOG 2.0 guidelines for management of brain injury. We'll be diving deeper into this topic, including recent research and actionable takeaways you can implement right away. Welcome, Penny. Can you get us started by telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, Sarah. A little bit about me. So I am a mom of four teens and young adults. I am married to a London paramedic, and I trained at Western, the University of Western Ontario, which is in London, Ontario, Canada, where I completed my master's. And I currently am working at a hospital setting as a medical speech language pathologist, and I'm really fortunate to hold assistant clinical professorship with McMaster University, as well as a lecture position with Western, my alumni. And I teach in clinical applications for ALD and augmentative communication, as well as, of course, the traumatic brain injury course, which is one of my favorites. I've had an opportunity to be involved in assisting in research for about 20 years, and a lot of that has been around systematic reviews and best practices and guidelines. And so everything from concussion to brain injury to stroke, and now INCOG 2.0. So that's a lot about me. And in my free time and occupied time, I tend to drink a lot of tea. And so that's about me.
I love it. I don't know how you fit that all in, but thanks for making the time to be here today. Tell us a little bit about how you got started working with brain injury and maybe like how your interest evolved over time.
Yeah, sure. So I really describe my way into brain injury is the best decision I never made. I started out as a stroke therapist, and through some of the moves in the hospital system in the city where I live, they were consolidating stroke services, and I was promised that I would go into my stroke position. And when the moves actually happened, you can probably predict what happened, that a senior SLP to me decided they wanted to take that stroke position, and that left only brain injury. And I was pretty upset about that. And I went into the coordinator's office for that interview. And she said to me at the time, what interested you in brain injury? We're really excited to have you join us. And I said, well, I'm actually a casualty of the moves, and I'm not happy about brain injury at all. And I proceeded to tell her all the learning I would have to do and the steep learning curve. And I did my best, and I tend to be a really positively focused person. And I said, I'll make the best of this. And I began working in brain injury. And within about 4 months, I was back in that coordinator's office and said, look, all that stuff I said, I take this all back. I love this area. I can't imagine myself doing anything else. And this is honestly the best decision I've never made. And I have been amazed at the trajectory of my clinical practice, as well as my opportunities within guidelines and best practices. It's just the icing on the cake. And you and I both know it's continuous learning in brain injury.
Yeah. Oh, wow. What a cool story of kind of an unexpected plan. And yeah, you certainly did make the best of it. So we're going to talk today specifically about the aspect in brain injury, cognitive communication and social cognition. So before we get really deep into the research, can you give us a summary about how you tend to think about these terms, just so we're all on the same page?
Yeah. So for me, cognitive communication is a term that captures really well our work in SLP. and particularly in traumatic brain injury, and it does so best. It refers to that communication, all of those underpinnings of cognition that allow us to communicate well. So if you think about orientation, attention, our perception, memory, problem solving, organization, being able to plan and sequence, that's important for a good joke. You can't tell jokes if you have a lot of cognitive issues affecting the communication of that joke. And so these cognitive underpinnings impact reading and written expression, our speech and our listening and processing speeds. So that's cognitive communication for me. And social cognition is how we interact with others appropriately. So it's really about how we read people. Are we aware of the rules of social engagement? Things like turn taking and speaking up and holding back when we need to. Taking other people's points of view, which sometimes we refer to as theory of mind, and regulating our emotions as we move into different contexts and under different demands, whether that's school, work, just living our lives. So that's kind of what those two terms mean to me.
Awesome. Yep. Sounds great. So, as we have our conversation then about cognitive communication and social cognition, we are going to talk about the INCOG 2.0 guidelines. And I just have to say, the INCOG guidelines have been within arm distance of me for probably 50% of my life in the past decade. So I'm so excited to talk about these guidelines specifically with you. And even though I'm a major INCOG guidelines fan, I also recognize, some of our listeners may be like, what is she talking about? So just in case people are not familiar with these guidelines, can you tell us what we're talking about when we say INCOG 2.0 guidelines and then your involvement with this project?
Of course. Same here with those INCOG guidelines being within arm's reach. As I speak right now, they're actually just to my right. So I am really excited to hear you say that. So the original INCOG guidelines were published actually back in 2014. INCOG 2.0 stands for International Cognitive. And we get asked that a lot, what does that mean? So International Cognitive. And the 2.0 represents the fact that the work has been, as you say, recently updated. INCOG 2.0 includes guidelines that are now a series of papers. And so they were completed through massive lit searches, reviews, and critical evaluation of studies for adults in each of the cognitive domains. And those included some principles about assessment and how we should approach assessment. The papers are around post-traumatic amnesia, attention, memory, executive functions, cognitive communication, and social cognition. And so they really resonate with speech language pathologists who do work in traumatic brain injury and acquired brain injury in general. It's an international working group, and this group represented Canada, the USA, Australia. It's composed of leaders in research, including Dr. Mark Bailey, Dr. Bob Teasel, Dr. Sean Marshall, Dr. Jenny Ponsford, as well as leaders in brain injury treatment and intervention from areas of psychology, neuropsychology, speech pathology, nursing, kinesiology, medicine. And then, of course, you have to have a lot of methodology experts and people who can pull all of that together and make it work and put it in front of the experts who are doing the committee work. And specifically, the paper we're going to talk about today, which is the part 4, cognitive communication and social cognition, was really led by, and I know you're going to know this name, the amazing Dr. Leanne Tower from Australia, and really a cast of other very well-known SLP researchers and leaders, Dr. Catherine Wiseman-Hakes, Dr. Lynn Turkstra, Dr. Jacinta Douglas, Dr. Mary Kennedy. And so I'm sure you can imagine my good fortune to have been invited to work on several of these committees with these great minds. These are leaders in our field, and it was a blessing to have a chance to learn and work on these. So I served on 4 of 8 subcommittees. Namely, I worked on attention and processing speed, memory, executive function, and of course, the paper we're talking about today, CogCom and social cognition. There were 8 papers published, and I think, Sarah, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe we'll make a connection to those in the show notes if listeners wish to access them.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things about these amazing papers is they are freely available. They're free access. So we'll be sure to include the links to those.
Yeah, so perfect. So that INCOG 2.0 work really seeks to capture and understand all of the available evidence in treatment for moderate to severe. And so it's a systematic review of the best practices in intervention. The INCOG work begins with that lit search review, and it's based on some criteria that's important for our listeners to understand. So the papers, when they're being pulled, their research assistants are saying, is it traumatic brain injury in this paper? Is there a good N size? That means, are there a large number of subjects or participants there? And does it impact treatment or talk about treatment? Otherwise, it doesn't get included in those reviews. And then from there, working groups meet to further review and discuss and then map the evidence and then build algorithms, which are contained in each of the papers to help those frontline clinicians to implement best practices. We also at this time in committee update audit tools, and the audit tools are how we know we're getting where we want to go with implementation. So that's important. And then sometimes we get to the place we get to write up what we're doing. And we did have an opportunity to write up and distribute drafts amongst the committee members and finalize all of that for publication.
I think right now, just my takeaway is this was such a major undertaking and such a collaborative effort. It's really kind of like a beautiful thing to see people from so many professions who care about the brain injury population coming together and make it something so usable for the everyday SLPs who are working with this population. So
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think, most of the, if not all of the contributors are PhD researchers, scientists, to have an opportunity for someone like myself, who is a clinician frontline working, it's just the perfect opportunity. So, yeah, so thanks for noting that. So, we're looking for that best evidence and emerging evidence in treatment, in cognitive communication and social cognition. And then we work to establish a lot of themes and best practices and a set of working guidelines to help, again, frontline clinicians in clinical practice who may be new to brain injury. They may have a lot of experience to brain injury, but they're looking to stay current. And as you noted, which was so fantastic, that all of the INCOG 2.0 papers are open source and they're not behind a paywall, because the goal is to get research into practice as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And Sarah, that's how you and I had our little moment, which I'd love it if it's okay if I could share.
absolutely. Yes, this is not the first time we met.
That's right. So the paper's published in January of 2023, the INCOG 2.0 papers, the update. And very quickly, my inbox started to kind of fill up with different things. And one of those really amazing things was, I think, a moment that happened on Facebook. And Sarah took a selfie of herself holding up our paper, the paper on cognitive communication and social cognition, and she shouted it out and said a little bit about. And I'll let you share what you said, but you took it away and summarized for your followers.
Yes, I know I get jazzed up about these type of things, and I was not exaggerating that the INCOG guidelines have been within arm's reach and a huge practice changer for me. And one of the things I try to do is disperse up-to-date evidence and research through my social media platform. So yeah, that's kind of how we started interacting.
Yeah, just an amazing moment for me, for people to say, I think she's holding your paper, and for me to know the amazing work you've been doing with your company and just the full on support you have for implementation of best practices. So I couldn't, it was a great moment. Following that, we received an invitation from ASHA to speak at a masterclass, and we learned that masterclass sold out immediately. And so we were really thrilled to see the spark of interest, and in our colleagues. And then the paper won what is called a Changemaker Award for innovation and its expected impact on clinical practice. So talk about ways to move from research to practice. We have January publication, and November we're at ASHA Masterclass. And I had a lot of fandom going on because of leaders like yourself, and of course the group of SLPs and physicians and research methodology folks that I get to work with. So then, you hosted this social event through your company at ASHA, where we had a chance to meet, talk about all things ABI and TBI, and the shift that both of us have come to appreciate that we need to do in treatment to make that more functional in how we work with our patients and clients. So for me, is a full circle moment from that time to now. And again, a straight from research to practice example, which is just perfect. And the other thing is that we think about research as often something we have on a shelf, and maybe it goes into a journal and it sits on a shelf, and people who are interested in that might access the topic. But we don't want research to sit on a shelf. We want it into the hands of people who need it, and such an important group of patients and their families that we advocate for in traumatic brain injury.
Well, thank you so much, Penny. That was an awesome, thorough summary of really all the work that went into the creating the INCOG 2.0 guidelines. Thank you so much from me as a clinical SLP. You guys you hit it out of the park. It's such an amazing series of papers. So let's dive into the paper we're going to focus in on today, which is part 4 on cognitive communication and social cognition. Let's just spend a couple minutes talking about like the highlights or the takeaways that paper really describes.
Yeah, sure. I have a few here to really highlight. I think most importantly, hearing and vision. The INCOG 2.0 added a lot of the physical, sensory, psychosocial aspects that clinicians need to be considering. So physical things like dysarthria and balance, but the sensory components were really important for someone like myself. I see a lot of times assessments were completed, and I wasn't ever sure if hearing screenings were being completed. Was vision being looked at? Were glasses being worn? Were hearing aids in place? Or if we needed amplification, were we using systems to do that? Also under sensory, sleep and awake disorders, and this is important work Catherine Wiseman-Hakes does. But that's important that we think about these factors as we're assessing and treating patients in brain injury. From the psychosocial aspect of things, people have anxiety, depression, PTSD, and this does impact cognitive functions. My other takeaways related to that, you need to complete those hearing screenings. You need, as your speech language pathology selves, to exercise into the full scope of your practice and involve your audiology counterparts to assist in that. It's really foundational, right, in assessing and treatment. More than just a takeaway is, and long overdue, is the continued important recognition of DEI, which is diversity and equity and inclusion. And SLPs need awareness and action. It's not enough just to do checklists, although ASHA has some great ones. Also get out and do training and look at all of those resources that are available to clinicians in those of us in busy practices. Cultural competence training is a new recommendation for INCOG 2.0, so definitely a takeaway there. And you and I both know that the individualized interventions matter. They are clearly now in the INCOG papers, emphasizing the need to be personalized. They need to be in the context in which the person with a brain injury is working, studying, socializing, and living. And I know this is not news to you. The other high level piece I think to mention is the evidence for goal attainment scaling, GAS. This isn't something specific to our profession only. It's across many professions, but this has been added as a recognized way of measuring individual goals that we're creating with patients. I think we've always known this, but communication partner training, this matters. And we now have lots of resources. We can turn to Dr. Leanne Toer's work from Australia in TBI Express, interactability, and the acronym's kind of interesting because interactability, she put the ABI in the middle of it. So that was clever, I thought.
Never noticed that. That is clever.
That is clever. Yeah, she's got some great work happening there, and all of it. A lot of it is accessible through a website, so that's really great for, again, busy clinicians. And then I was really pleased. AAC stays in the updated INCOG guidelines. It's still an important part of our work in supporting communication differences with our patients in TBI. Yeah, so it should be routinely offered, AAC. Group treatment for the win. That was wonderful to see. We kind of clinically know this to be true, and we know the very important role of peer support in a lot of populations, but in brain injury and young students, really important. And I've seen this in my own work in return to school. So we know also that people have social cognition challenges and changes after brain injury, impaired theory of mind, some trouble with emotional empathy and reading that. So there are groups recommended as part of INCOG papers, some groups like the GIST, which is the Group Interactive Structured Treatment, Insight, and Project-Based Treatments, which I am loving the project-based stuff, where they're working with individuals who have a brain injury and giving them a specific project, like starting up a cafe or having a bake sale and preparing all of the advertising and recipes and doing reading and writing and memory through functional project-based tasks. We also know that telerehab is efficacious when it's used with the communication partner training, and there was level B evidence for that. And I should say that the group treatment, just to go back because it's super important, it's level A evidence. I mean, that's not a small matter. It's really strong evidence that we should be using it. I will say just before I end that list is just that social cognition treatments really shouldn't be delivered by computer-based, according to current evidence. It's not individualized, it's not real life. And so we have to be very careful, I think, about delivering ready to go and lack of clinician computerized formats for trying to treat social communication issues.
Yeah, so for that one, that's not tele-rehab. Like you're talking about kind of just like the generic apps or programs, or hey, if you just play this game for so long, then your social cognition is going to improve. That's kind of been disproven. Like, nope, don't do that.
Yep, that's perfect, because we did see benefits for telerehabilitation, for partner training, but you are exactly right. It's when you sit someone down in front of a computer and you're hoping for change and you're not present or you're minimally present, and it's just an app that does that.
Thank you so much for that thorough list of the main takeaways. And I just wanted to mention to the listeners, these really are really nicely presented in the paper in the table also, one of the tables in the article. So it's just so easy to read. So if people want to go back and just look at that list, they can find that there. Okay, so I wanted to get into, from the list you read, let's apply that to how we spend our time in the everyday as clinical SLPs. So how do we take that research and apply it into clinical practice? And I thought it might be helpful to just walk through the clinical flow and talk about the different moments in our day and how this research, the INCOG 2.0 guidelines, would impact what we do. So if you're okay with that, let's first just talk about what type of TBI clients do these guidelines apply to?
Yeah, perfect. So for the INCOG 2.0 guidelines, we're talking about an adult population. And again, we're doing moderate to severe brain injury. And I would say that aspects of the recommendations apply across settings where we work and support individuals after brain injury. So could be acute care, could be rehabilitation, definitely home, school, work, and living life. So this doesn't mean that the information won't apply to our work in cognitive communication in concussion, but that's not the specific population studied in the review papers or presented as part of the papers themselves. There are other resources for that evidence, and one of the sites that I know about is the www.braininjuryguidelines.org, so open sourced again.
Yeah. Okay. So, kind of moderate to severe brain injury, and let's just start by talking through the assessment. Like, what can we take from these guidelines that would impact our assessment time?
Right. So it's going to increase the focus on how you will prepare as you move into assessment. So you're going to want to ensure that you're respecting diversity, you're being equitable and inclusive. ASHA has again some checklists that I would recommend consulting and posting because really we've got to get there. We can't just say like checkbox, it's done. It has to be front of mind. And so posting in your workplace, get something that's catchy and eye opening too, because I was surprised when I consulted some of those checklists, some of the simple ways that I could be better at recognizing and being aware of differences and things, ways I could change my assessment materials to be more inclusive.
Yeah, and let's include the links to those too. That would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great. I would have loved that as a busy clinician to have the ready to go links. There are also these video and audio resources to ensure that you're at front of mind. So those assessment aspects on the DEI side, for sure, are going to be coming from INCOG 2.0. You're going to be fully supported in getting the education, training, teaching that you need. And then complete those hearing screenings. Part of assessments need to include hearing screenings and also screenings with vision, and then the related eyeglasses and hearing amplification devices as you complete assessment. So you're not left wondering if you completed memory assessment in memory and then the patient didn't perform optimally. Were they hearing me well, or were they seeing the materials I was presenting? So it seems foundational to me. And then don't wait on assessment, or so don't wait on AAC. To get started on that early is really critical. I think we've seen as a discipline that AAC is something later or something down the road, but we need to get started early and present this to patients who are really struggling with communication.
One way that I've found I've been a little bit more accountable for these things that maybe like 10 years ago we weren't doing is just building in those headings into the assessment template, right? Like we might be using templates that don't include anything about hearing and vision. So then we kind of forget to think about it, or even AAC, we may not like have that as a routine thing that we're starting to think about. So that might be a way to just help people be accountable to doing that.
I love that. I love that idea. That is really, true. If you have a checklist, a reminder to do that, it's a lot easier to keep it front of mind. The algorithm from the INCOG 2.0 paper may assist some people as they're starting to build those checklists because there is an algorithm that flows through and includes these aspects that we're talking about. So, yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, so then thinking about when we're writing our goals, what can we take away from the INCOG 2.0 guidelines that affect how we choose the goals that we're setting?
Yeah. So, well, yeah, goals now more than ever need to be individualized and relevant to the person and the context in which they're hoping to be working, studying, living, and doing what they do. When I was training, way back when, you completed an assessment, and then that told you or pointed you towards the goals. And I think those days are done. It's not going to be a manual thing where it just spits out, the goals and it's driven by the clinician. We need to be ensuring that our patients are completing the formal measures, but also a lot of informal measures. And so I think about La Trobe Communication Questionnaire that Dr. Jacinta Douglas has, and really providing input through these informal measures about what's therapeutically valuable to them.
Yeah, and that, let me just interrupt. So that La Trobe Communication Questionnaire, it's really a form of a patient-reported outcome measure, right? Where it's just a structured way to get info from the patient. So instead of the old way where it was all just the SLP giving input, it's you have a structured way to get input from the patient.
Yeah, so important. It's back to that busy clinician needing some structure and cueing to which questions to ask and which things fit when we talk about this population of patients with TBI and ABI. And then I think from a goal setting consideration from INCOG, goal attainment scaling, so GAS for short. It really needs to be part of how we set goals and evaluate the success of patients in achieving and reaching their goals. And the recommendation to use GAS is actually unchanged from the original INCOG guidelines. So it's been there a while. And I really want to mention there are some great infographics out there to help with this. Why not post a goal attainment scaling infographic front and center in your office space for everyone to see and kind of appreciate?
Fantastic. Just a quick clinical SLP question. So when you're using goal attainment scaling, do you find you're able to do that already on visit 1 with clients, or is that something that you might be progressing to as you do like the next couple sessions?
Yeah, I think it's more of a progression too. A lot of times when patients come to see speech language pathologists, they don't understand our scope of practice either. And so I really think they need to understand what it is, the services that we can provide and help and supports, and that helps them to then better work with the goals and set those, as you just noted, those goal attainment scale numbers. So yeah, I would see it as a progression for sure.
Awesome. Okay. So, kind of set the stage. We've done our assessment. We've included the patient input. We've set goals that are individualized. And so, talk us through how the INCOG 2.0 guidelines affect then our actual therapy time.
Well, as you know, the days of worksheets and workbooks and therapy removed from reality are gone. And I guess I'm happy about that, as we all should be. How do you get generalization when you are working from worksheets, workbooks that are so far removed from what the patient's day to day experiences are and their communication and cognitive needs? So, this means that we're going to need to truly partner with our patients and our families to determine what matters to them and then make that the therapy. So, you enjoy golfing, you work as a bookkeeper, then we're going to practice and map our attention and memory, problem solving, organization, planning, reading, writing, interventions right onto that. You like golf? Look at all the social communication opportunities and scripts there are within that meaningful activity to you activity. So, in treatment, there are more ways now to streamline personalization and making therapy more functional and meaningful, thanks to the work from many entrepreneurial SLPs like yourself and people who've built these web based real life functional materials. Thinking about how many times I now use podcasts, like the one we're doing today, to target auditory processing and attention and memory. And so you can really look at people's interests and TED Talk your way or podcast your way into working on all of these CogCom areas and reading, writing goals in really practical, fun, functional ways. And then using those services can really help every busy SLP to just be more personally relevant while at the same time keeping that productivity and professional grade materials and tools in mind. So the INCOG guidelines point to the importance of our therapy time there, and also being, involving the family members and training communication partners that are with our patients and clients all day long. And there are a lot of established programs that can help us do that. So if we think back to, I earlier mentioned interactability, these are ready to go programs that can help us to work at improving therapy productivity and efficiency. And the guidelines also look at telerehab platforms and providing communication partner training through that format. I think during the pandemic, we unleashed a lot of freedom to explore that platform. And I'm really pleased that for some things, the INCOG 2.0 papers found the telerehab was a really great way to provide some services, and particularly through communication partner training. And you can do that now knowing it's evidence-based practice. And so group therapy works for everyone, and we can do more of that.
Let me ask a question about that. So, I know you're in Canada, I'm in the US, so we have kind of some different billing models, but how does group therapy work where you are? Because I don't see that being highly established here in the US. And I think part of that might be because of billing issues. So I'd just love to hear kind of how it's working for you. Is it the universities usually establishing those opportunities or?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And I do think there's a pretty significant difference between our countries with that. So we do have on an OHIP in my province, Ontario Health Insurance Program, which fully funds, and people do not pay out of pocket for those things. It gives a lot of flexibility that I know my colleagues in the South are not going to want to hear this part of the podcast, to allow to deliver services in formats the clinician chooses. And so I will only be able to speak to the funded portions of work because I'm not a privately practicing clinician. But within the OHIP system, we are able to provide and deliver services the way we think are best. And that might be best for the patient. In brain injury, you can imagine trying to come into the hospital, park, get to your appointment on time, back up, get dressed, and get yourself in there. By the time you get to your appointment, you're pretty tired. And we saw some significant benefits to patients' fatigue levels and less irritability with that offering the telerehab platform. So I think there are differences from country to country and even province to province within Canada. But I'm really, I guess, say fortunate that I can provide that service, and my colleagues can provide that service.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's nice to hear like how other people are making it work. We all kind of have our unique barriers, but I think where there's a will, there's a way, and sometimes we just need to be creative with how we're going to nudge towards that. So, let's talk about the guidelines. How do the guidelines impact how we work as part of an interdisciplinary team for the client's needs?
Yeah, so even if you look at the INCOG composition alone, if you just looked at who was there, you'd see the importance of the interdisciplinary team lens. And as I mentioned, there are experts with all backgrounds represented in the committee work. And that's because no one discipline can really manage the complexities of the work in brain injury alone. And so, just one example that comes to mind for me is the hearing and vision work. We know that those sensory needs are foundational to the work that we're doing in CogCom and social communication. And that interdisciplinary team is essential in getting the work done. So audiologists and OTs, PTs, SLPs, and nursing really playing key roles in sorting through what that patient is hearing and seeing. You can look at patients, and physio does this all the time, and determine like there's a midline shift there, something's going on, with the patient's body that may be happening because of changes in vision or difficulties there. So reminder that teams do not need to be physically occupying the same spaces, but you do need to be on the same page. So if you don't have an IDT, interdisciplinary team right where you are, you can create one and find a network of people who do what you do and plug into that. So the importance of IDT and interdisciplinary care in this area of brain injury just really can't be understated. And I think INCOG committee work with everybody coming with their lenses to the table, it happened across continents. And so we can do that. We can do it in our day-to-day practice too.
Awesome. Okay, so let's bring some of these guidelines to life. I always like to hear how this actually fits in with a real case example. And since I've gone through such a shift in my own practice from non-person centered to person centered, I also find it really helpful to like kind of compare and contrast, like maybe the more traditional way we used to do things and then what it looks like now that we have some updated guidelines. So I'm going to talk us through a case example. Thank you for sharing this example, Penny. I'll go ahead and present it now. So here's our example. Sarah South is a 32-year-old woman who sustained a moderate to severe TBI in a car accident 2 years ago. She has a wife of 5 years and 2 children, ages 2 and 4. Prior to her accident, she was a vibrant and social individual. She worked as a secretary in a large company. But since her injury, she's experienced significant challenges with social communication and interactions. And I'll just kind of give a couple bullet points of the type of social communication issues that she has. So she has impaired social awareness. She doesn't always understand social norms or cues. She misinterprets facial expressions, so can be have a lot of misunderstandings. She has difficulty taking turns in conversation, so she might like interrupt or dominate a conversation. She has reduced empathy and perspective taking. She just has difficulty recognizing or responding to emotions. And so it's really impacted her relationship with others. And she has impaired social judgment. She might do things that are considered inappropriate or make comments that are socially inappropriate without realizing it. And as a result of all these things, she has social isolation and frustration. She's starting to avoid social gatherings because she might be embarrassed or have rejection, and this makes her sad. She's not able to fully participate in life. So that's kind of the example we're going to be working with. Sounds pretty common with that mod to severe TBI population, right? So traditionally, we might see this patient and they would be part of a multidisciplinary team, PT, OT, speech, social work, psychology, but we would probably all work pretty separately in siloed care. We might not have a lot of collaboration. If I was going to see her for an outpatient basis, then I would probably like see her just by herself. The client would not have her kids with her. That would be way too distracting to have little kids in the area. I would provide information about social norms, etiquette. Here's some practice worksheets with scenarios or social errors or faux pas, and then our client would have to say, what's the problem here? What did this person do wrong? For homework, I would send worksheets home where she'd have to like consider different points of view on the worksheets. Maybe we would do some role play in our session, but it would just be like me brainstorming a scenario and having her respond. And then if Sarah's wife asked how therapy was going, the client, then she would say, oh, it's fine. It's a little tiring, but I really like my SLP. And that would kind of be the end of that. So none of that sounds too different from things I've done in the past. So Penny, why don't you kind of get us up to speed a little bit and highlight the ways we can change that whole story so that we're up to date using the INCOG 2.0 information.
That's perfect. I think the one thing that we didn't include in that traditional approach would be using board games or gestures or charades, this sort of thing, to work on that social communication. So
yeah, like turn taking in a game isn't actually turn taking in conversation, but that's what we fall to traditionally.
and we've all done it. I think this is the thing I want people to understand, is that we have all just done the best with what we had as we were trained, or what was taught to us through our internships or practicums, and or what was available on our bookshelves, or so that's important. So one of the things when we were presenting at ASHA in November, I was really focused on what will we do on Monday. Monday after we do this presentation, what will people implement? And the same thing for this podcast. So I'm really hoping, as you listen through this example of the changes, and now that you're up to date with INCOG 2.0 guidelines, what are those changes going to look like for Sarah South? So Sarah's rehabilitation team is still going to include speech language pathology, occupational therapist, social worker, and psychologist. And they're going to collaborate really to address her social communication challenge. This is going to be IDT at its best. We're also going to see at the very front hearing and vision screenings completed with Sarah. They're going to occur as part of assessment. And we're going to reach out as we need to audiology and our optometrists and neuro-optometrists as we need to. Sleep questionnaires are going to be part of Sarah's assessment. We're going to consider different questionnaires that we could use for that. Communication questionnaires are completed by Sarah, as well as her spouse and maybe a few of the close friends and coworkers with, of course, permission and consent. And we might use Latrobe communication questionnaires to do that, or other proms to do that. Perhaps traditionally, we might think about the cultural differences or considerations that were resulting in social communication challenges, but we really want to focus on digging deep into seeing, are there cultural reasons why there's changes in what we might perceive as a difference in her social challenges. And so we're going to ask about that and check in. We're also going to make really good sure that the materials we're using are diverse and inclusive and represent the whole Sarah from her cultural and linguistic and gender identity lenses. And we're not just going to think about one and done. The SLP and Sarah are completing therapy sessions in a partnership. And they're going to do that in a variety of different settings. They're going to go to Sarah's home. They're going to go to her kitchen. Maybe they go to a local coffee shop, or if they have permission from Sarah, an employer, to go back to the former office space. And definitely they're going to be out in the community, because that's where communication, cognition happen. As sessions progress, Sarah's going to be asked to have some sessions with her spouse present, as well as some sessions with the distractions of her two young children, because she has to work and do her life in that busy environment. And so we're gonna do that in a real context. And the goal in all of that is to promote real life examples from Sarah's social communication challenges and solve real life problems, really through coaching and support and scaffolding, using strategies, etc., to make that therapy as specific as possible, as salient as possible, and immediately transferable. So I'm going to pull a piece of evidence, and I hope it's okay, Sarah, from the INCOG 2.0 paper on executive functions, just for a minute here. And just, if that's okay. Yeah, and just mention here that the informed 2.0 SLP is going to also think about video imaging during sessions, because that's readily available. All of us have phones in our pockets and devices. And so we're going to encourage the patient to use their own device, right, from a privacy confidential standpoint. But we can use video imaging during the sessions in different contexts, and then review that recorded video, providing feedback to Sarah as we treat her awareness or self-awareness and social cognition challenges. It's simple to do that now. It used to be more complicated. Remember, we had to get a big camcorder out? We don't have to do that anymore.
Okay, this is such a great idea. So, of course, right away when you said video imaging, I was thinking dysphagia, but you're talking like for these social cognition issues, like, hey, let's go, you have to check with the secretary about your schedule next week. So I'm going to just videotape you and we can watch how that interaction goes. I mean, it can be something as simple as that, right?
Yeah, that's so great. I mean, I think we used to be really self-conscious about being on film, but now with the rollout of selfies everywhere, people are much more comfortable. Not everyone, but a lot of people are more comfortable with doing that. When we do that recording, Sarah has an opportunity now to review that video clip between sessions, providing her own feedback, really looking at her own analysis and her own metacognitive skills, and do that in between as, not bad homework, but homework practice. And so, additionally, Sarah is going to participate likely in group treatments because we know from the INCOG paper that this is recommended. We've got level A evidence on group treatments, and she is going to probably do that with others who are living with brain injury who are matched in age and interests, which again, back to this peer support component, so important in many of our populations, but TBI no exception. She might participate in structured social treatments programs. There's a few. I hope it's okay I mention them. The GIST, we did present in the paper, which is about social competence. Another one called IMPACT, which is communication and metacognitive strategies and training. And this will be part of Sarah's therapy plan. It might further her turn taking and those perspective taking abilities. And while she's watching, other people in the group get feedback about that, it's helpful to see others in addition to receiving feedback yourself. And let's hope that would gradually build her confidence and social abilities. The role playing exercises and real life scenarios are going to be generated by Sarah, her spouse, her friends, and her coworkers, and we'll use those in therapy to help practice social behaviors and responses. I'm not going to dive into too much on the evidence for CBT, but it's out there. We know that if we involve psychology, neuropsychology, and provide work through our social workers through CBT, that's going to be really important to reduce some of that social anxiety and frustration. So Sarah's going to practice strategies. And finally, we're going to take Sarah's wife and friends and interested coworkers, and we're going to make them part of the care team too. They're going to receive some communication partner training and some family and caregiver education because in INCOG, we know the evidence is for that. It's not just the patient. When someone has a brain injury, everyone is affected. And so throughout Sarah's time, we're going to be providing that education ongoing. And there are some free self-guided online trainings offered, interactability again there. So I think Sarah's SLP is going to give them a QR code to do that because that's going to make it easy for the clinician to have those ready to go and hand off. And it's going to be easy for, most importantly, the patient and family to access it.
Yeah. I want to highlight a couple things because it feels so scary when you're switching to person-centered care because you're going from like, well, I have all these papers in front of me and that's telling me what to do. But if I don't do papers, that means I'm on the spot to come up with what to do. But really what I heard you describing here is it isn't on us to come up with everything. This is where we facilitate what the scenarios are from the client and from their family and their friends. And they give us the scenarios that are important to practice. And that's something that I've loved about person-centered care because we get to learn about and practice so many things that I know me alone, I wouldn't think of that, but my patients put us in those situations, which is really cool. So
It's when we partner with our patients and their families, they come up with really great creative ideas too.
yes. Thank you so much. This has been jam-packed with lots of information. I hope everyone gets out there and becomes like you and I and starts carrying the INCOG 2.0 guidelines around with them. As we wrap up today, do you have some final words of wisdom or inspiration that you would like to leave with the audience?
Yeah, I would. So if I go back to the notion, I read it, I think it was last week, I encountered this again, and it said, on average, it takes 17 years for research evidence to be used in clinical practice. And that is astonishing to me. And it should be unacceptable for us. We need to get better at doing a few things. And there's a few things that I think I see you doing really well, Sarah. And I just want to mention that in closing, these are a few of my thoughts about, what we can be doing as a discipline to help. So, number one, talking up the work of other SLPs. We have to shout out to the amazing research completed by our SLP colleagues. If I think about my colleagues on INCOG, Leanne Tower, Lynn Turkstra, Catherine Wiseman-Higgs, Mary Kennedy, Jacinta Douglas, who have dedicated their entire careers to advancing brain injury research, understanding, and supports. And so the Tower Lab, the Turkstra Lab, Compassionate Justice Fund are a few of the initiatives that these researchers and PhDs have been doing. And I just want to shout out the amazing support that they give to other clinicians like myself and to each other, the whole community. Number two, I would say staying close to news and research outlets and leveraging the positive power of social media to spread the word. You did this when you held up our paper on Facebook. And, when we can spread the word about treatments and evidence and best practices, we can all benefit. However that happens, it needs to happen, and it shouldn't take 17 years to do it. Our patients and families and loved ones living with brain injury, they deserve that. And I want you to think about challenging yourselves. Each time you attend an educational opportunity and you expend money and cognitive power to do that, I want you to think about, what can I change or practice on Monday following what I've just learned? So, for example, if you're listening to this podcast about INCOG 2.0 on a Thursday, by Monday, I want you to walk in your office or cubicle, I don't want to be judgy about that, with a new plan in town. I want you to hang an infographic, print the INCOG algorithm, or you can put up a visual reminder of your commitment to best practices, whatever that looks like for you. You can keep your changes small, but you have to keep them coming. And lastly, neuroplasticity. It's a real thing. I think we've been talking about it for a long time, and we know that we've all bought in that brains can change. In fact, the time that you've been listening to this podcast, your brain has already undergone changes. You are not the same as when we started talking an hour ago, and neither am I, and neither is Sarah. It is mind-blowing when we realize that. If we look at the principles of neuroplasticity, even just 3 of them, if we look at specificity, saliency, and transference, making therapy relevant, meaningful, engaging, and practicing in context with each patient that we serve is how we harness neuroplasticity. And it just happens to be consistent with the INCOG 2.0 papers. I'm hoping we'll get some of that, into the show notes, even the neuroplasticity principles, the 10 principles, which is not what the INCOG 2.0 papers were focused on. But it's, for me, as I was preparing to chat, it's pretty evident that if we're going to change brains, we need to take principles in neuroplasticity and best practices from INCOG 2.0 and understand they're working together.
Yeah, they definitely work together, which is wonderful. So that's all the time we have for today. Penny, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for your unwavering work with the 2.0 guidelines. Thanks for sharing your insights, your clinical takeaways related to specifically cognitive communication and social cognition for TBI.
Thank you as well, Sarah, for the work you do. And I want to just thank you for the opportunity to just present the work of the INCOG 2.0 papers on behalf of the large group of experts in our field. So thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of SpeechScope by MedBridge. Please be sure to subscribe and listen to more of our episodes on Spotify or on your favorite podcast platform and at medbridge.com. If you're listening outside of the MedBridge catalog and would like to access the bonus resources and receive continuing education credit, simply log into your MedBridge account and search for this episode to find the accreditation details. SpeechScope also listens to you. If there's a particular clinician that you'd like to hear from, or if you have a clinical question or challenge that you'd like to see addressed on this podcast, Please let us know by leaving a comment on our Instagram posts or by emailing podcasts@medbridge.com.